Well, we've got a small bit of St. Louis Cardinals news as the team announced a waiver claim on Friday for a player that, at least in terms of the needs of the roster, could fit in pretty well in 2026. Is this a move that made sense for the Cardinals? We'll talk about it coming up on b-schaeff Daily. What's going on, everyone, and welcome into this edition of b-schaeff Daily. Brenden Schaeffer with you Friday, February 6, 2026, and we've got a little news here as the Cardinals announced a waiver claim of infielder Bryan Ramos from the Baltimore Orioles. And Ramos was just traded a handful of days ago from the White Sox to Baltimore in exchange for cash considerations. And then evidently Baltimore puts him on waivers and the Cardinals say, gimme. And they claim Bryan Ramos, and they announced this deal officially. 23-year-old who predominantly has played third base in recent seasons, has totaled 80 career home runs in 560 minor league games with the White Sox, had 16 home runs last year at AAA Charlotte. Has made his big league debut, had logged 111 career at-bats in the big leagues across 2024 and just a handful of games last year. Numbers do not jump off the page for him, not at the big league level and not really even in the minors, but passable. And here's the key. Again, some experience at third base, has some defensive experience as well, is listed as a left fielder and second baseman as well on Baseball Reference. 93 games appeared at third base last year, a couple in left field, just one at first base. It's been a minute since he's played second base. So predominantly a third baseman when he's out there defensively. And he's right-handed. I mean, that is the key of it all because the Cardinals have been pretty loaded up with left-handed position players. Maybe they have a plan to try him out in the outfield. He's played sporadically in the outfield, like I said, listed on Baseball Reference as a left fielder too. They just don't have a lot of right-handed hitters when it comes to their outfield, but even when it comes to their infield, it would make sense if they were going to try to stock up some candidates for the bench and kind of increase the degree of that competition, that you would want some right-handed hitters to potentially spell the lefties that predominantly will stock this lineup. We think it'll be Gorman at third. J.J. Weatherholt, I imagine, has a real good chance to make the opening day lineup at this point. He would probably be at second base. Alec Burleson at first base. So that's three infielders with of the left-handed persuasion. We know Mason Wynn at shortstop. Outfield, Victor Scott in center is another lefty. Newt Barr, when he's healthy, is another lefty. And you'll have Walker in right and Herrera behind the plate. And then your DH, you can kind of figure how you want to go about that. They don't really have, other than when Herrera DHs, and your catcher is probably Pajes or maybe Jimmy Crooks. We'll see if they carry a third catcher or if it's Pozo, whatever the case may be. You know, you're left-handed heavy, and you don't really have a lot of great DH options. I'm not saying this guy is necessarily going to be one. Bryan Ramos, career 198 batting mark in the big leagues across, looks like 119 plate appearances. Slash line of 198, 244 on the on-base, 333 slug for a 577 OPS. So very much he's yet to make a real impact in the big leagues. But a 705 OPS in AAA, which also doesn't jump off the page. The 216 batting mark in AAA last year does not jump off the page. But the 16 home runs, you like that. 13 stolen bases and 17 tries, so moves decently well. And like, for a guy who you look at the batting average as low as it is, and there's a little bit of pop in the bat, the 16 home runs were across 105 games, 431 plate appearances. So like a strong 2/3 of a season, probably even a little bit more than that if you're looking at just the trying to pace it out to what that would be over a full season if a guy were to start every game. You know, that's 20-plus home runs if you pace that out. But only hitting 216, what I was going to comment upon is the strikeout total is only 96, which is like not great, but it's not awful relative to the 216 batting average and a guy that seemingly has some power there. So Bryan Ramos, and again, what you got to remember about this is he's free, right? You claim a guy on waivers. They've had a hard time. I mean, the Cardinals have made deals this offseason. They made 4 trades. They've had a hard time bringing guys in that are right-handed hitting position players. Even in the Donovan trade, you brought in a couple of prospects that you like and think have a chance, or you wouldn't bother trading for them, in Ty Pete and Colton Ledbetter, both left-handed hitting outfielders. So even in a trade where you had, the baseball world kind of at your beck and call when it comes to, you've got this asset that people are going to want from you. Even in those instances, the Cardinals said, well, we're going to take these left-handers instead of, whatever right-handers may have been available. Perhaps there were some right-handed hitters in those organizations where the Cardinals said, hey, we're interested, and the other team said, we're not trading those guys, but you can have this guy. So at that point, you're like, well, are we going to make that big of a deal about handedness when it's guys that are 2-3 years away from contributing? In the case of Ty Pete, in the case of Ledbetter, if he's going to do it, it's going to probably happen within the next couple of years. You're not going to take a lesser prospect because of the handedness, I think, is really what they've run into. And so when you got a chance to get a guy for free and add some depth there, guy who's been, versatile at times in his career, has played in some different spots. I know nothing of his defensive acumen. I don't know how good he has been defensively. But it's interesting that he gets traded and then immediately gets cut. And sometimes these things happen in the offseason, right? Baltimore might have thought, we'll give a little bit of money for him, and then, we'll figure out a way to use him. But then, you may end up having other moves that take place. And I'm reading the update on MLB trade rumors from this. It talks about the 60-day injured list opening up next week will create some extra roster flexibility for more of these types of fringe roster moves. Getting a player through waivers is therefore easier now than it will be next week. So Baltimore adds Ramos, probably hopes to slip in through waivers potentially, as other teams are maybe, I don't know about caught napping, but just, they might be busy with some other stuff. And Baltimore also added Blaze Alexander in a trade with the Diamondbacks yesterday. And this is something that was posted this morning by MLB Trade Rumors Friday afternoon, after this news came out, originally reported by Francis Romero. So basically it sounds like the Baltimore Orioles added another infielder that they might like a little more than this guy. And so they say, hey, if we can keep him and just try to pass it, pay a little money, pass him through waivers, and then we have him as part of our organizational depth. If you don't pass him through waivers, then, obviously he leaves. But it's an interesting one. And again, these are when you make these types of additions, and then a couple months later, or in this case, like it happened for Baltimore, 4 days later, the guy ends up being cut, as he was in the Orioles organization, or placed on waivers. Sometimes it's fine. Nothing ventured, nothing gained. Maybe a little bit of money in their case. But I think this is an interesting name simply because of the bench makeup for the Cardinals. I don't necessarily, and Chaim Bloom has talked about potentially going outside the organization and adding a right-handed hitting outfielder in particular. And that was something he mentioned in the press conference responding to questions about the Brenden Donovan trade. So it seems as though the Cardinals will still be on the prowl, but I prefer for them the avenue of the non-roster invitee, or, the waiver claims that you might be able to, come up with somebody. And this kid's only 23 years old, so maybe still growing into the player that he will become, and had a requisite, 705 OPS is nothing to write home about in AAA, certainly. You can project it to be lower than that in the big leagues. And for this player, Bryan Ramos, it has been. When he's gotten big league chances, he's in the 570s for his OPS there. But if you were to produce a player that could OPS 700 at the big league level, that's a nice bench piece. And if he's, was 23 last season, now I guess he'll be going into his age 24 season, and not 100%, trying to pull this up on the birth date there to figure out exactly how old he is and when he turned it. He is still 23 until mid-March, so about to turn 24 in spring training. A guy with, a little bit of power, a little bit of intrigue in that regard. 3 big league homers to his credit in the 120 or so plate appearances at the big league level. So I think this is a perfectly fine addition. And what else is interesting to know about this player, as I kind of talked about the notion of nothing ventured, nothing gained, Ramos is out of options and was probably going to have a tough time cracking the Baltimore roster, according to what MLB Trade Rumors had to say. I don't know for sure their depth chart. But yeah, a guy who's 570 some odd in the big leagues, I think you if you're Baltimore, you say we're going to spend a little money, try to sneak him through waivers after we acquire him via trade, and if we do, great, we've got him as some additional depth. But I think everybody, you could have 5 or 6 teams looking at the same player, and all of them might have the same idea and say, hey, be great as like a non-roster invitee. We don't want to have to count him against our 40-man, but we'd like to take a swing on him and have a crack at him. But the Cardinals basically preventing the Orioles from doing exactly that. And now with the Cardinals, they did have a 40-man spot available after the Donovan trade. And so this is not to say that, oh, no, now they can't add J.J. Weatherholt. They don't have room. No. That's not how it works at all. There will be moves made. There will be guys that go on the 60-day injured list next week, and I think it'll open up a spot immediately. I'm not 100% on how they will function this, because obviously when you put somebody on the 60-day, I'm talking about like the pitchers that, like a Tekoa Roby, if you put him on the 60-day, yes, you get the 40-man spot, but you're paying him big league salary all year, which I don't really know. I don't know what that comes down to being, or if they avoid paying the big league salary by being able to option a guy. But can you option a player who's injured? There are some things that are not always clear to me about this, but if anybody out there knows, you can say, hey, this is what it is, you dummy. You should know. And I probably should, but I'm just talking off the cuff here, as we always do. And so I'm not really familiar. But nevertheless, there's going to be moves that are made where the Cardinals are going to be able to, like, they're going to have a spot for J.J. Weatherholt when the time comes. And look, if they don't, then, yeah, this guy might be the casualty, but in late March, after you've seen him for a full spring. These are exactly the types of moves that don't cost you anything. And because of how difficult it has been for the Cardinals to find right-handed hitters to maybe fill some of these voids, and I know you've got guys like Fermin, you've got Sajacy, and both of those guys will be certainly candidates. And maybe both of them will just be on the bench. We'll see. But it'll be interesting to see if they get a look here at Ramos, and certainly this could be a name that it'll be like the Simpsons meme where the guy walks in, puts his hat down, does a little spin, and then leaves. That is always possible with these types of deals. If they find a better usage for that last 40-man spot, it feels like one that's rather malleable once you claim the guy on waivers. But maybe they've got bigger plans for Bryan Ramos, and certainly seems like a player with a little bit upside. The Cuban-born third baseman is what I'll call him. And obviously, yeah, you have Sajacy that can probably fill in there. But what if Ramos looks good in spring and they decide, yeah, he's out of options, so we're gonna take him with us to kind of get through the early portion of the season. Maybe you have a situation where Lars Nootbaar's on the injured list to start the year, and maybe that's the direction that you go in order to fill out that 26-man roster. So we'll see. Let me know, Cardinals fans, what you think about the Bryan Ramos move. I think it's perfectly fine. I don't think there's any reason to be mad about it. I don't think there's any reason to be like overly excited about it. But nice little get. It just shows, I think, that Chaim Bloom is paying attention to these transaction logs and making sure that you're leaving no stone left unturned, which is, I think, what Cardinals fans want. So that'll do it for this edition of the show. Appreciate you guys for tuning in, and we will talk to you next time on b-schaeff Daily. Peace.